The evening at the Kong mansion was a spectacle of luxury. Crystal chandeliers reflected the sparkle of champagne, and classical music filled the air, drowning out the whispers of a wealthy family amidst its opulence. At the center of it all, a young maid Boone tried to remain invisible. It was her first major event, and the fear of making a mistake consumed her. What she didn't know was that her destiny was about to change drastically, and not for the better. Across the room, a woman with a mischievous smile, Melissa, watched her. Her eyes were a reflection of contempt. With a quick, deliberate movement, the wineglass in her hand tilted, and the crimson-red liquid spilled onto Boone's white dress. The music stopped. The hubbub died down. All eyes turned to the humiliated girl, standing in the middle of the room as a reminder of her place. That was the day they humiliated her for a simple wine stain. But her revenge would be so wicked that I was forbidden to tell the ending.
This woman's life was ruined by the Kong family. But when she opened this box, she found out they were the ones who started it all. This is Boone. She was a maid who accidentally ruined an elite party. The next day, her boss, Mrs. Kong, stole her job and kicked her out of her house with nowhere to go. But Boone had a plan. She went to a local cafe to meet her grandmother, a woman who everyone underestimated, but who actually had the strength of a hurricane. Instead of comforting her, her grandmother gave her a box. It was filled with the diaries of Boone's father, a man whose business the Kong family destroyed years ago, driving him to bankruptcy and ruining his life. As Boone read through the diaries, she learned that her family was just the beginning. The Kongs were a ruthless, powerful family who built their fortune on lies, rigged contracts, and blackmail. But the more Boone uncovered, the more she realized that she wasn't just a victim. She was a pawn in a game that she didn't even know she was playing. And she was about to make the Kongs pay for what they did to her family.
Boone's plan was simple but brilliant. She wouldn't attack head-on, but would sow chaos within the Kong Empire from within. Using information from her father's diaries, she created an anonymous online profile and began strategically leaking information. First, the media received a tip about a shady contract the Kong family had signed. It was a small seed, but suspicion was already planted. Every day, a new detail, a new lie. Investors' confidence in the family began to shake. Melissa, the girl who humiliated her, was the first to feel the blow. An old video depicting one of her scandals mysteriously appeared on gossip forums. Her reputation, built on a perfect image, began to publicly crumble. The humiliation she had inflicted on Boone was returning, but on a tenfold scale. The Kong family tried to cover up the scandal. The media was bought off, and fake news spread. The pressure was enormous, and Boone felt a moment of weakness, but it was her grandmother's gaze that kept her strong. She continued leaking information until a bombshell story hit the front page of a newspaper. The article revealed the Kong family patriarch's financial scandal and pointed to the betrayal of a longtime partner. The Kong family raced against time to discover the source of the leak. What they didn't know was that the girl they were looking for was not in a meeting room. She was sitting in a diner, drinking a simple coffee, watching their empire crumble. The chaos in the Kang family business was a perfect storm. The patriarch, a man accustomed to domination, saw his empire teeter under the weight of anonymous leaks. With each new headline, each investor who fled, his fury grew. He could not accept being defeated by an invisible figure. The counteroffensive began with a relentless manhunt. He hired the most select team of cybersecurity investigators and former intelligence agents, not to protect what remained, but to find the source of the poison that was destroying him. Boone, on the other side of town, felt the noose tightening. Her actions, once a game of long-distance strategy, now became dangerously personal. She noticed the small cracks in her anonymity. IP tracking attempts, spyware phishing emails disguised as news. The tension was suffocating. One night, while monitoring the network, a breaking news alert made her freeze. A news portal, linked to the Kong family, published a devastating story. They had discovered the identity of one of their informants, an old friend of her father's. The man named Mr. Lee was exposed as an accomplice of Boone's. The Kang family hadn't arrested him, but were using him as bait, forcing Boone to reveal herself to save them. Thea had found a weak spot in her armor, an emotional bond she couldn't sacrifice. The message was clear. If she didn't stop, Mr. Lee and his family would suffer the consequences. Boone found herself faced with an impossible choice, a moral crossroads that forced her to reconsider everything. Continue with the plan and risk the life of an innocent person, or stop everything and lose her father's only chance at justice. Revenge seemed sweet, but not to the point of destroying the life of a person who was not guilty. While the Kong family celebrated their small victory, Boone retreated into seclusion. She delved back into her father's diaries, searching for a clue, a final ace up her sleeve. With each page, she felt the presence of the man who loved her and taught her to never give up. It was then that a seemingly insignificant entry caught her eye. The entry referred to a backup path, a backup plan her father had devised in case his business plan failed. It wasn't a financial secret or blackmail, but something far more valuable. A contingency plan that would reveal the true essence of the Kang family, its thirst for money and power above all else. Boone understood. The game was no longer about destroying their empire, but about exposing the family's true colors. She prepared a video to be sent, not to the media, but to the people who truly mattered. The partners, the investors, and the Kong family's inner circle. The video contained a recording of Mr. Kong admitting his crimes, vowing to destroy anyone who stood in his way, and revealing how much he despised the very partners he now needed to save himself. Boone knew this was checkmate. Time was running out. The Kong family was preparing for the final move, and Boone would have to be quicker than ever to execute her plan and turn the tables once and for all. She was about to deliver the greatest public humiliation the patriarch had ever suffered, showing everyone that the true wealth lay not in a safe, but in a closely guarded secret. The final showdown was approaching, and Boone was ready for battle. Winner video ready. Boone acted quickly. The Kong family, confident they had cornered the girl, scheduled a public event to celebrate the end of the scandal. It was their final gambit, a grand speech from the patriarch to reaffirm the family's power and honor. Boone not only knew about the event, but also guaranteed she would be there, not to hide or lament, but to watch from the front row as their empire crumbled in real time. She secured a press pass and blended into the crowd of reporters and photographers. The Kang family patriarch took the stage, cheered by his supporters, with a superior smile, too. He began his speech by thanking his partners and his family for their loyalty, and promising that, despite the obstacles, the Kang Empire would rise stronger than ever. But as he spoke, something began to happen on the giant screens broadcasting the event to the audience. The broadcast was interrupted, and a video, with low-quality audio, began to play. It was a recording of the patriarch admitting all his crimes, mocking the innocence of his partners, and boasting about his hidden fortune. The audio was in his voice, but it was as if Boone's words had been placed in his mouth. The patriarch's smile froze. He desperately tried to stop the broadcast, but it was too late. The video had already been disseminated, sent anonymously to the media, emailed to associates, and even to his family's cell phones. The confession of his crimes was there, in plain sight, and there was no denying it. The shocked audience began to murmur. The press, in a frenzy, began taking photos, capturing the patriarch's expression of panic and humiliation. He, who had humiliated Boone over a wine stain, was now being humiliated in front of the entire world by his own voice. But Boone wasn't there just to humiliate. In a final act of justice, she used the video as a checkmate. She revealed the location of a hidden fortune, embezzled years earlier from one of the patriarch's business partners. The revenge wasn't loud or flashy. It was the final blow. The quiet reckoning, built on pain and dedication to honoring her father's memory. She, who had been the invisible girl, the humiliated maid, became the greatest proof that true wealth and power come not from rigged contracts, but from well-kept secrets. As the lights dimmed on the stage, the Kong family fell to their knees. They didn't just lose their fortune, they lost their honor, their respect, and, above all, their freedom. Their humiliation of Boone wasn't an isolated incident, but the spark that ignited the greatest revenge in history, a plan so vicious that history has become an example of how revenge can be sweet and justice a dish best served cold. Spore. The fall of the Kong family wasn't just a newspaper story. It was a social earthquake. The patriarch, who considered himself untouchable, was arrested in his own mansion, a symbol of his downfall. The public humiliation, broadcast on video, was a fatal blow. The press, previously submissive to his power, now portrayed him as a criminal, a thief who built his fortune on the misfortune of others. His business partners, once sycophants, abandoned him, fearing the stain his arrest would bring on their own names. The ruin was total and irrevocable. Melissa, the girl who started it all, suffered an even crueler fate. Her face, once synonymous with beauty and status, became a symbol of arrogance and evil. Advertisements featuring her as a poster girl were cancelled. Her social media accounts were bombarded with hateful comments, and her public appearances were met with boos and scorn. The stage of her life, which she so loved to showcase, became a nightmare. Revenge, for her, was not financial loss, but the total loss of her dignity. She could no longer live in the society that deified her, and the pain of her humiliation forced her to seek refuge in perpetual isolation. While the world watched their unraveling, Boone disappeared. She didn't seek fame, money, or recognition. Her revenge wasn't loud, and she was content to watch from afar, scoots, using part of the fortune recovered by the government. And in a gesture that honored her father's memory, she started a relief fund for people who, like him, had been victims of fraud and manipulation. The fund, named after her father, became a beacon of hope. It offered legal and financial support, ensuring that victims of corporate crimes had a fighting chance. Boone's life didn't become a fairy tale, but rather a story of purpose. She didn't become rich, but she became a guardian of justice, ensuring that what happened to her family would never happen again. The wounds of her past became the driving force for her future. Boone saw the fund not just as revenge, but as a path to redemption, to healing. With each person she helped, the pain of her loss became a little lighter. She didn't build a new fortune, but rather a legacy of compassion and justice. Her story spread, but her identity remained a secret. To the world, she was a ghost, a mysterious figure who appeared to deliver justice and then disappeared. Yet, to those who knew her and were helped by her, Boone was proof that humility can be the greatest weapon of all. She didn't take revenge to be seen, but to show that the power of justice is greater than arrogance and greed. Her father's legacy and her own strength combined to create a new path, one that wasn't about revenge, but about healing. Years had passed since the fall of the Kong family. The media furor had subsided, the headlines were replaced by new intrigues. And the family name, once synonymous with power, was now a ghost of the past. Boone, the girl who had orchestrated everything, lived a quiet and discreet life. She didn't become a celebrity. She didn't seek the wealth the Kong family lost. Instead, she devoted her time and energy to the fund she had created, helping people rebuild their lives. But even with peace in her heart, she still carried a single physical reminder of that period of pain and revenge. Her father's diary. On a sunny afternoon, Boone visited her father's grave, something she did every year. The grass was green, the sky a clear blue. She sat on a bench, holding the diary in her hands, and opened it to a random page. Her father's handwriting was familiar, but the words took on new meaning. She was no longer reading the notes of a frustrated businessman, but rather the reflections of a man who, even in the face of defeat, never lost hope. On one page, he spoke of his love for life, the joy of helping others, and the importance of fighting for what was right, not for revenge, but for justice. Boone realized that the true reward lay not in seeing the Kong family humiliated, but in the journey revenge forced her on. The pursuit of justice made her discover a strength she never knew she possessed. Revenge realized that the wine stain on her dress was not only the beginning of her revenge, but the catalyst that transformed her into who she was. She was no longer the humiliated girl, but the woman who, in a world of corruption and arrogance, chose justice. Revenge, she understood, was only the means. The end was the peace she now felt, the happiness of being able to help others, of knowing that she had honored her father's memory in the best way possible. The final lesson her father left her wasn't in trade secrets or revenge plots. It was in the diary, in a final passage she'd never noticed before. "My greatest wish," he'd written, "is that you find your own strength, your own peace. Revenge is a fire that consumes. Justice is a light that illuminates." Tears streamed down her face. She wasn't crying out of sadness, but out of profound gratitude. Gratitude for the father who, even after his death, guided her to the truth. The story of how a wine stain changed a life forever became a reminder that humility can be the greatest weapon of all. 2. Her journey wasn't about destroying, but about building. Building a legacy of kindness, courage, and justice. And the greatest revenge she could have was to live a full, happy, and purposeful life. Something the Kong family would never have. Years passed, and Boone's story became a whispered legend in the corridors of major corporations and law firms. She was never identified, and for the world, justice was served by a ghost no one could trace. Her life remained discreet, but her legacy flourished. The relief fund she created, which began with a small seed of hope, became an influential foundation dedicated to combating fraud and social injustice. Lawyers, prosecutors, and even former Kong family investigators, impressed by the boldness and precision of her methods, rallied to the cause, vowing never to let Boone's story be repeated. Revenge, for her, was not the end, but the means to a greater purpose. Boone, now a mature and wise woman, taught others the importance of using intelligence and courage rather than brute force. She saw her work not as simple retribution, but as a way to honor the memory of her father and all those trampled upon by the powerful. The wine stain on her dress, once a symbol of her humiliation, became the emblem of her transformation. She looked back, not with anger, but with quiet gratitude. Hatred drove her to revenge, but revenge led her to a life's purpose. She became a beacon, a guide for those who have no voice. Her story, told in secret among the fund's members, became a survival manual, a reminder that even in the face of the greatest adversity, honor and justice can prevail. Boone's foundation not only helped victims recover what was stolen from them, but also taught them to defend themselves, to use the law and truth as their weapons. She showed that the power of justice is greater than arrogance and greed. Society, once blinded by opulence, now saw the Kong family not as a symbol of success, but as a moral lesson. Most importantly, they saw the story of Boone, the girl who was given nothing, as proof that humility can be the greatest weapon of all. Boone's life was not a fairy tale, but an epic of resilience and purpose. She lived a life of dignity and peace, something the Kong family would never have. Boone's greatest victory was not the downfall of her enemies, but the building of a life based on justice and compassion, proving that even the greatest humiliation can become the beginning of an extraordinary legacy. She, once a victim, became the heroine of her own story. Revenge, which began with the spilling of a glass of wine, ended with the building of a life that honored justice and courage. A reminder to all that true revenge is living a life your enemies could never have.